Now, we're not in the business of taking prisoners. We're in the business of killing Nazis. And son, business is a boomin'. Hello everyone and welcome to episode number 25 of Movies Are Awesome, the show all about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. My name is Nathan Pottle. Thank you so much for joining me today. It is a pretty decent day, in all things considered. Nothing too bad. I found my pop filter, but the room that I'm recording in is still very echoey. I don't know if putting my pop filter back on is going to cut down on that or not. I'm going to have to figure out a way to cut down on that echo for you guys. But in the meantime, you just got to deal with it. I have to deal with it. I can hear the room echoing as I'm speaking right now, so I know for sure that it's going to come up in the recording. I'm going to try and cut that down as much as possible when I go to edit it later. But for the time being, it is what it is. I'm still transitioning and getting used to my new home, stuff like that. So that's what I'm dealing with right now. Today, I'm talking about It Chapter 2. Just as how all of my reviews work, I'm going to do non-spoilers first, and then we're going to move into the spoiler section. There is stuff to spoil in this movie. I don't want to give anything away if you haven't seen it yet. It has been out for about a week now. I saw it on the Thursday night release, and I was very excited for this movie, ready to go. I liked the 2017 It very, very much. Granted, I have not read the book. I also have not seen the original TV movie version. So this was kind of my first introduction to the It story back in 2017. And I really liked it. It almost made its way into my top 10 favorite movies of that year. It ended up just being an honorable mention, though. Didn't quite make it in. However, I did really enjoy the 2017 It Chapter 1. Moving into this one, it takes place 27 years later, kind of. The kids are now adults, and they're all living their own lives. Most of them have moved away, except for Mike. Now, Mike was the kid who was homeschooled. He lived on a sheep farm, and he has stayed in the town. And there's something weird about the town of Derry. When you move out, you just kind of forget. Mike is the only one who remembers what happened with the clown. All of the other characters, they don't remember. They've forgotten. And so now It has resurfaced. Pennywise is killing kids once again, and it is up to the Losers Club to band back together and remember what they have forgotten and take down that evil clown. The first thing I want to say about this movie is it is very well cast. Jessica Chastain is really great. James McAvoy, don't remember the names of the others, but the standout of this movie for sure is Bill Hader. He plays Richie, I think is his character's name. Yes, it is Richie. Because then there's Richie, there's Eddie, there's Bill, there's Mike, I don't remember all of the names, but that's pretty good for me to remember that many character names. I remember who they look like and basic descriptions of each kid, but that's about it. This movie was also directed by Andy Muschietti. That might be how you pronounce it. I don't know 100%, but he also directed It Chapter 1, so a lot of the same feels and tones translate from the first movie to this movie. It feels very seamless moving into this film. What was interesting about this movie is it has lots of flashbacks. Now that's interesting only in the sense that there are so many flashbacks that this could almost be a standalone movie by itself, and you don't even really need to see the first one other than some additional context of things. But at the same time, a lot of the flashbacks that we see aren't part of It Chapter 1. So we're seeing new scenes with the kids that we didn't get in the first film. So seeing the first one and this one, they're very complementary, but there are so many scenes with the kids that you don't even really need to see It Chapter 1 in order to understand what's happening in It Chapter 2. So that's kind of a negative thing that I took away from this movie, is that it really is not its own film. It's a lot of its own film plus scenes from the first. I would say maybe almost half of this movie is flashbacks. which isn't horrible in its own sense, but because it's a sequel, I would rather that it like stick to being a sequel as opposed to keep going back. Like, yes, everyone loved that cast of kids, and they were all really good. They worked well with each other. But going back to that well again and again and again, it felt a little bit lazy to me, and we didn't get to know the adults as well because of this. So that's one of my negatives of It Chapter 2, is that we don't get a lot of time with the adults all together. I'm going to talk more about that in the spoiler section, but one of the things that really was strong about the first film was the cast of kids interacting and just the conversations that they have and playing off of each other. It was really, really good. It was one of the strengths of the movie. So in this movie, I was hoping to get that with the adult cast, and we didn't really get that because of just the story that they're telling. And like I said, when we get to spoilers, I'll go more in detail with it. One of the things that I also didn't really like about this movie is the CGI is not that good. And like, I'm fine with, like, I'm not one of these people who complain, oh, there's too much CGI in movies. CGI, just like anything else, is a tool to be used for telling your story. And if that tool is used well, then I'm not going to complain about it. If it's used poorly and used too often, then sure. Well, too often isn't really something that I complain about, but used poorly and too often paired together, that's the issue. So this movie has a lot of subpar CGI. Some of it works really well, but for the most part, it looks kind of fake and kind of weird and not that great. In one of the trailers, there's a scene with an old lady, and that old lady is really creepy, and then it turns, and then there's more of like a CGI fest going on in that scene instead. And once it hits that, I'm clocked out. Like, it's not interesting anymore. It's not creepy anymore. It's just this CGI old lady monster thing that really just doesn't hold my attention. And maybe that's how it happens in the book, but in the book, it probably feels more real than it looks in this movie. But at the same time, some of the effects of Pennywise the Clown look really good. Like the way he contorts his face and opens his mouth, and some of that stuff, really chilling, really realistic looking. And the more real something looks, the scarier it is. If my mind can say, hey, this is something that's plausible, that can exist in the real world, I'm going to be terrified. And some of the images of that clown, like on my drive home and the night after seeing it, they stuck with me, and I was like, whoa, that was scary. But some of the other stuff, it's really just video game looking type stuff, and it's not up to snuff. It's not as good as some of the other visual effects that I've seen in the past. As a quick example, a movie that has tons of CGI, but there's no time to recognize it because they're telling a great story and everything is good, is Dawn of the Planet of the Apes with Andy Serkis and Jason Clarke. I absolutely love that movie, and there's so much CGI. The performance capture of all the apes is spectacular. It is stunning. It looks so real. I don't really have any complaints about that movie. It's just so strong and has such good tension. And so because everything is so strong and the CGI is so on point, I'm not complaining that there's tons of it because it's used really well. So that's one of the things about It Chapter 2 didn't really like. This movie is very long. It clocks in at like 2 hours and 49 minutes. So by the time you watch the trailers and all that stuff, you're sitting in that theater chair for 3 hours. But I didn't feel the length of the movie. The amount of time that it should have been with the story that they were telling. I don't want to get into spoiler stuff until later, but it felt like it did. I wasn't like looking at my watch saying like, okay, like let's get moving. I kind of was near the end. Like once the climax of the movie is over and they're just doing their kind of wrap up stuff, I was like, okay, let's get it wrapped up. Let's move along. I want to go home. So there's just that little bit of pacing problems at the end of the film, but throughout, I think it's paced pretty well, and you move the story along quite a bit, and there's lots of good humor in the movie to keep you sustained. I think there's more laugh out loud moments than like jump scare type moments, these movies aren't that scary. Let's talk about that for a second. It Chapter 1 is not a scary movie. I think what they're trying to do is tell a good story, and also it happened to have some horror elements to it, right? So I don't think they're straight up trying to terrify you. I think they're just trying to tell a good story that happens to be horror-esque, right? So when you get into things like that, when you look at the story from that perspective, it's really strong. It's a strong film. If you're going into this movie saying like, I want to be scared out of my mind and I want to not be able to sleep for a week, that's not what this movie is. It could be for some people. If you're really not into clowns, maybe this movie terrifies you and you are not able to sleep for a week and have to have the lights on and can't be alone, things like that. But for myself, it really just, it's not that scary. But because I'm not going into this movie expecting to be scared, I'm expecting to be told a good story and to be like entertained, and that's what happened. So I enjoyed this movie. Now, I talked about at one point about how the director is working on a supercut of Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 to be in one super movie. One just like 5-hour long movie extravaganza. And having seen both films, I would really like to see an edit of both of these films. And I would like it to be both like adult stories and kid stories going on simultaneously, and you're going back and forth. Like, I don't want it just to be It Chapter 1 and then It Chapter 2 butted up against each other. I would like it to be edited as one cohesive film. So if they're doing something like that, I'm 100% down. I'm going to buy that Blu-ray and I'm going to watch it and I'm going to really, really enjoy it. But if it's just going to be a Chapter 1, Chapter 2, butted up against each other, done deal, then I'm not going to like it as much. And I'm hoping that that's not the case. The director, what did I say his name was? Andy Muschietti. He is very passionate about these two movies that he made. He really wants to do this supercut of one. He wants it to be available for home release. So I'm really looking forward to that prospect of that happening, and I would like to see it happen. As far as non-spoilers, I think that's it for what I'm wanting to talk about right now. I'm giving the big ol' warning right now. I'm moving into spoiler territory. So if you have not seen It Chapter 2 and you don't want to be spoiled on things, turn the podcast off, go see the movie, come back later, see if your opinions line up with my opinions, stuff like that. Let's start a conversation. If you have seen the movie or if you don't care about spoilers, just continue on watching. So on my notes here that I made, first thing I want to talk about is the Stephen King cameo. If you don't know what Stephen King looks like, obviously you're not going to notice that he was in the movie. There's a scene where, I think it's Bill, James McAvoy's character, sees a bike in a window and he wants to buy that bike because it was his when he was a kid or whatever. So he goes in the store to buy the bike, and the old man who runs the store is played by Stephen King. And that was kind of like a fun little cameo. Whether they're trying to make whether they're trying to make Stephen King into the next Stan Lee, where he just like shows up in all his recreations, I don't know. If they want to do that, I'd be fine with it. I wouldn't complain. And his acting wasn't awful. I thought he was good in the scene. And it was kind of a bigger role. Like, he had several lines and he had things to do. He wasn't really detrimental to the story, but it was a nice nod, and it was good of them to include Stephen King in the making of this film. So I appreciate that they honor the source material and they honor the creator of that source material, so that they to the point that they include him in the movie. So if you haven't seen it, go or if you don't know what Stephen King looks like, that guy that Bill buys the bike from, that's to Stephen King. They have kind of a running joke in this movie, and Stephen King is included in this, where James McAvoy's character is now a writer, but all of his endings suck. And so they talk about it throughout the movie, that the ending, oh, you can't write an ending, endings are bad, ha ha ha. I'm going to say the ending for this movie is kind of silly, and it didn't do anything for me. So basically what happens is, in order to defeat it, They need to make him shrink. So they want to lead him down a tunnel so that he'll shrink down, because at the time he's like a big half crab spider creature who's like hacking away at people. And they want him to shrink down, so they're trying to lead him down a tunnel, but he blocks the way of that tunnel so they can't go down there. So they're like, well, there's another way to make a person feel small. And so they just insult him. He's this cosmic being who feeds on fear, and like saying that he's a loser makes him shrink down in size, I guess. So I felt that this was very foolish. It didn't do it for me at all. The visual effect of when he's shrunken down and his face is like flat, I think that was done practically, because it looks very real, and I liked that effect of his face being like flattened down up against the wall, and he's just like this tiny little shriveled up being. But overall, like, how does this make any sense? We have to, like, he feeds off of fear, he preys on children, and like making him feel sad is what defeats him. And it's not even making him feel sad, it's like telling him insults to make him believe that those things about himself are true. And it's really dumb. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's not to the point that it ruins the movie for me, but it's enough that I don't like it. I don't think it's a good element to the story. I don't think it really makes a whole lot of sense. And that's about it. So maybe they have that running joke of him not being able to have good endings is because they knew that their ending is kind of ridiculous. And so they wanted to like poke fun at themselves, saying like, well, like, we know our ending is stupid, so we're gonna bring attention to it. But knowing that your ending is dumb doesn't make it less dumb. It just brings more attention to it. So what they should have done is maybe have a better ending. And no, I don't know what that ending should be or could be, but it could have been better than just insulting it and then tearing his heart out of his chest like Indiana Jones and crushing it. Earlier in the non-spoiler section, I mentioned the adults not having enough time to play off of each other. We get one scene where they're all together, like right at the beginning, and they're in this Chinese food restaurant. I like that scene a lot. It might be my favorite scene of the whole film. I don't know 100%, but it's for sure up there. And they're just insulting each other and remembering their childhoods and having a great time. And then it gets kind of weird, and there's like dead baby birds like flying out of fortune cookies and stuff. It's crazy and ridiculous, and I like how that scene plays out a lot. It really kind of adds tension to like what is going to happen, who's going to survive, when is this showdown with it going to happen. It's a really good scene, and I like it a lot. But from there, all of the adults go off onto their own solo adventures, and that's where the movie like isn't as strong for me, because I liked the play off of the kids so much and them as a group. I would have liked to get that chance to have that with the adults as well. But instead, we get this kind of formulaic adult gets to a place, they have a flashback of them as a kid, a scary thing happens to them as a kid, go back to them being an adult, a scary thing happens to them as an adult, and then they get their totem or relic. They get their relic that they need to perform this ritual so that they can capture it. And that like happens like in sequence, and it gets kind of predictable and formulaic at the time. So it's a little weak in that sense. We don't get, by the time it happens the third time, you know that you're kind of getting this for each character, and it's going to play out kind of the same way, and they have an encounter with it, and then he goes away. Why doesn't he just kill them? I don't understand. If he's like in the same room with them and it's just him and no one else, why doesn't he just kill the adults? From what I understand in the book, they're under the protection of the cosmic turtle, but the cosmic turtle is not in this movie or the first movie, so it's not really explained, and it could have killed them a lot of times, like so many times, but he chose not to because plot armor, I guess. It's sounding like I'm really hating on this movie a lot, but I did like it. I want to say for sure, I think it's a good movie, but I want to be as comprehensive as possible when explaining my feelings and seeing like how could this movie have been stronger. So I did like this movie, but I have some other things that I'm going to be pulling apart a little bit. But overall, it is a good movie. I wanna stress that for sure. I mentioned it, so I might as well talk about it. There's no cosmic turtle. With some of the weird stuff that was happening in this movie, I was kind of hoping that there would be a cosmic turtle. And in the book, now I haven't read it, so I don't know exactly. I just know like things I've heard from people who have read it. There's this cosmic turtle who is its enemy, and he's like trans-dimensional and like goes through the universe, just kind of doing whatever space turtles do. And the ritual that they perform like summons that turtle, and then they fight and like they kill it somehow. I don't know exactly how that's supposed to work. It's very ethereal and very kind of out there. A lot of the stuff in that book, I guess, is kind of out there. So it doesn't make sense, and they don't have it in the movie. But because there's no cosmic turtle, there's things that happen because of that turtle that don't really make sense. Like I said, the kids and the adults are supposed to be under the protection of this turtle, and that's why it doesn't kill them or whatever. And so it's just kind of, I was kind of hoping that there would be a turtle, but there isn't one. I was talking about, I'm switching gears here, not really. I'm just kind of going wherever my heart leads me, kind of thing, you know. There's a part that in the first movie, in It Chapter 1, when Beverly and Bill kiss, and Beverly has her hand on Bill's face, and it bothered me a lot when I saw it in the first movie. I'm a continuity person, so she puts his hand on his face, and she has 2 fingers on either side of his ear. And then when you go into the next shot, there's 3 fingers on one side of his ear and 2 on another side. And when it cuts back and forth, the fingers on his face change position. So that's something that I noticed right away on my first viewing. I've seen the movie twice, I think, and it bothered me both times because I like that kind of continuity. But one thing that they did in It Chapter 2 is when Beverly and Bill kiss as adults, the exact same thing happens. And the fingers are on either side of his ear in the exact same way, and they switch in the exact same way when they cut back and forth. So that is too exact for it to be a coincidence, so they had to have done it on purpose to have it line up to that way that it's shot and framed in the first film. So I really appreciate that they did that. I'm positive it was done on purpose, 100%. I have no confirmation of that, but I am going to say for sure that is what they had intended. Now, I think it was an accident in the first film, but the fact that the two characters kissing the exact same way with the fingers on the face, it has to be on purpose. There's just no way it's a coincidence. And I like that kind of attention to detail. So that gets a big old thumbs up from me. I like that a lot. There's just a few more things I want to talk about here. Kind of like, what is their plans? They've got this ritual. Now, does this ritual make any sense? So basically what this ritual is each of the kids need to find a relic from their past to help them remember their past so that they can burn it in a pot to forget their past and confine it in this box. And Mike discovered that this ritual existed from talking to some Native Americans who he got high with, and then like saw the future and like discovered this is how you defeat it, and you trap them in this box. And I just don't understand, like they kind of breeze over how this is supposed to work or why it works, or how even the Native Americans figured out that this works. Whether they got it from the cosmic turtle or they just got really high and said like, hey, this is how we do it. But for whatever reason, this is the plan, and nobody really questions it. They're just like, okay, you must be right because. So, but at the same time, Mike knows that the ritual did not work with the Native Americans and then they all died. So, what is it that's different that makes Mike think that it's going to work this time? This is something I don't know, and maybe it's explained in the book, but if I need to read a 1,000-page book to understand what's happening in your movie, you failed as a movie. So what is it? If you know the answer to this question, please let me know. Reach out to me on social media. I would love to know the answer. I'm not going to look it up though, but if someone wants to tell me, that's totally fine. But what is it that's different? And Mike says something about it in the movie. He's like, no, they didn't believe that they could do it, so they weren't able to. But we believe harder, so it's possible. We can do it. How does that make any sense? How does it make any sense? It doesn't. Because, like, did he figure that out while he was high? That, oh yeah, those Native Americans, they didn't believe hard enough that they could defeat it. But if you believe in yourself, you can do it. Or maybe it was something that it had, like, planted in his brain. Like, he performed Inception on him, saying, like, if you believe you can catch me, then you can. It's really just, like, a whole mess. Like, the climax of this film is really muddy and doesn't make any sense at all. What really does not make sense is at the beginning of the movie when Mike is calling everyone to summon them to Derry, he calls Stanley. And now Stanley was like a big ol' scaredy cat in the original film. And he still is, I guess, because as soon as he hears that he has to go back to Derry, he just kills himself. And that's how the movie starts, with a big ol' suicide. And then at the end of the movie, they get letters from Stanley saying, like, hey, I knew I wouldn't be able to help you, so killing myself, it was actually helping you in the best way I could, because if I was alive and didn't go, then you guys would be weaker. But if I killed myself and took myself off the playing field, then you would all be stronger without me. So I don't know how that really works either, or how does Stanley know that works is an even bigger question. It's really just the plot, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But at the same time, even though it didn't make a ton of sense, I still really enjoyed watching it. Some of the character journeys are really good, especially Bill Hader's. I liked what his character had to do throughout the film. I also liked Jessica Chastain as Beverly. She's really good. I used to not like Jessica Chastain that much, but over the last few years, I've really warmed up to her. She's great in Molly's Game. If you have not seen Molly's Game, that movie is pretty good. It is written and directed by Aaron Sorkin. It is kind of weak as far as cinematography goes. I kind of expected more. It's one of the only movies that I've actually noticed the cinematography is, like, really bland. So if I can notice that your cinematography isn't where it should be, then it's not up to par. But the movie as a whole, it's really good. Check out Molly's Game, and check out It Chapter 2. I think that's all I've got to say about it today. I went through all of my notes. So, It Chapter 2. It's come and gone. Have you seen it? What did you think about it? Feel free to reach out on social media. You can find me on Twitter @PoddleNathan and on Instagram @PoddleProductions. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I really appreciate it, and I would love to hear what you thought about It Chapter 2. And if you have nothing else to do, go watch more movies.